The city never questioned his authority. When the lights of the skyline flickered against the river, they flickered for him. Every nightclub that stayed open past midnight. Every shipment that passed through the docks without inspection. Every judge who suddenly reconsidered a verdict. It all traced back to one man. He wasn't just a mafia boss. He was infrastructure. For 20 years, he built his empire brick by brick, not with bullets alone, but with patience, leverage, and psychological precision. Men feared his silence more than his rage. Rivals collapsed before wars even began. And beside him through all of it was his wife. She wasn't loud. She wasn't flashy. She didn't attend the champagne-drenched parties or sit at the head of negotiation tables. But she knew everything. She remembered numbers without writing them down. She memorized the names of politicians before they were elected. She understood loyalty better than the soldiers who pledged it. When he rose to power, she designed the invisible architecture. But power changes shape. And recently so had he. The mistress was different, younger, sharper in a reckless way. She didn't understand the empire, she admired it. She admired him. And admiration is intoxicating to a man who is used to obedience. Tonight, she stood barefoot in his penthouse kitchen, the city glowing behind her like a crown of fire. "Why does she still have access?" she asked softly, swirling wine in a crystal glass. "Why does she still think she matters?" He didn't answer at first. He was staring at his phone. His wife hadn't called in days. No accusations. No tears. Just silence. The mistress stepped closer. "If you want this to move forward," she whispered, placing a hand on his chest, "you have to cut her out completely. Not halfway. Completely." It wasn't the words that pushed him. It was the idea of appearing weak. He had built an empire on decisive action. Indecision was decay. So he unlocked his phone. The message he typed was brief. Cold. Surgical. "Don't contact me again. Everything you have is because of me. Remember that." He stared at it for a long moment. 20 years reduced to one sentence. Then he pressed send. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The mistress smiled, satisfied, and leaned into him as if a chapter had just closed. But across the city, in a house that predated the empire itself, his wife's phone lit up on a quiet dining table. She read the message once. Then again. Her face didn't change. No shattered glass. No trembling hands. No desperate calls. Just calculation. She walked to a study lined with old files and opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside were copies. Ledgers. Access codes. Insurance policies, not the kind you buy, but the kind you build. She picked up her phone. Her reply was short. "You're right. Everything I have is because of you." She pressed send. Back in the penthouse, his phone vibrated. He expected anger. Maybe a threat. Instead, he read the message and frowned. It wasn't defiance. It was acknowledgement. The kind that sounded like agreement, but felt like a warning. Before he could process it, another notification appeared. Banking system, access credentials updated. He blinked. That wasn't possible. Another alert. Dock shipment rerouted. Then another. Private account login from a secured device. The mistress noticed his expression shift. "What is it?" He didn't answer. Instead, he opened his encrypted network dashboard, the one only 3 people in the world knew how to operate. His accountant. And his wife. Certain permissions had changed. Not revoked. Not erased. Reorganized. Strategically. A captain called. "Boss, did you authorize the new distribution structure?" "What structure?" he asked quietly. Silence on the other end. "That's what I thought." The line went dead. The air in the penthouse felt different now, heavier, as if something invisible had entered the room. He replayed her message in his mind. "Everything I have is because of you." Not emotional. Not wounded. Certain. The mistress stepped back, fear flickering across her face. "You said she doesn't know anything operational anymore." "She doesn't," he replied automatically. But even as he said it, memories surfaced. Late nights when she insisted on backup codes. Meetings where she quietly suggested redundancies. Accounts structured under layered trusts. At the time, he called it loyalty. Now it looked like foresight. His phone buzzed again. Security footage notification. He opened it. The camera showed his wife earlier that evening, entering a private bank building after hours. She wasn't sneaking. She walked through the front door. And the guard held it open. His jaw tightened. Power doesn't collapse with explosions. It shifts with permissions. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar press against his ribs. Not anger. Not jealousy. Uncertainty. The mistress moved closer again, but this time her voice lacked confidence. It's just a scare tactic. She's emotional. She's trying to make you react. But he knew his wife. She never reacted. She prepared. His screen lit up one more time. A final message. No sender ID. Just a single line. Check the offshore accounts. His breath slowed. Very few people even knew those accounts existed. And only one person helped design them. He looked back at the skyline, the city that bent to his will. Somewhere out there, a quiet war had just begun. And it started with a message he never should have sent. Power has a sound. For years, his empire sounded like certainty. Phones answered on the first ring, doors opened before he knocked, men standing straighter when he entered a room. But this morning, something was different. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was subtle. And that made it dangerous. He walked into his private operations office just after sunrise. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor, his harbor. Ships moved in quiet obedience across the water. But inside the room, the air felt delayed. His most trusted lieutenant, Marco, stood by the table reviewing shipment logs. Normally, Marco would greet him immediately, eyes sharp, posture locked. Today, there was a fraction of hesitation. A flicker. Morning, boss. Too calm. Too neutral. Status, he replied. Dock shipment 47 rerouted overnight. Authorization came through central clearance. I didn't authorize it. Marco nodded slowly, as if he already knew that answer. That's what I thought. A silence stretched between them. In this world, silence was information. He scanned the room. Two other captains avoided eye contact. Phones were being checked more frequently. Conversations stopped when he walked past. His empire wasn't rebelling. It was adjusting. And adjustment meant someone else had issued instructions. Back in the penthouse hours earlier, he had told himself it was a glitch. A minor systems override. Nothing more. Now it felt like choreography. His phone vibrated. The accountant. He stepped into his private office and closed the door. Tell me it's a technical error, he said. The accountant's voice was tight. It's not an error. The pause. Certain offshore accounts have new verification layers. They require dual authentication now. Dual with who? He asked quietly. The silence on the other end was answer enough. His jaw clenched. She doesn't have operational authority anymore. She doesn't need operational authority, the accountant replied carefully. She has structural authorship. Structural authorship. The phrase echoed. She didn't just know the empire. She built its skeleton. He ended the call and stared at the city again. Across town, in a quiet cafe no one associated with power, his wife sat alone with a tablet in front of her. No bodyguards. No spectacle. Just tea. And a series of secure confirmations lighting up her screen. Access realigned. Trust redistributed. Contingencies activated. She wasn't attacking. She was reminding the system who understood it best. Back at headquarters, tension thickened. A rival family abruptly withdrew from a scheduled negotiation that afternoon. No explanation. Just a message. Circumstances have changed. Rivals don't walk away from leverage unless they're warned. Warned, or offered something better. The mistress paced the penthouse like a caged animal when he returned. They're testing you, she insisted. You need to respond. Publicly. Make an example of someone. He watched her carefully. Fear had replaced ambition in her eyes. This wasn't the reaction she expected. You said she was emotional, he replied calmly. She is. No, he said quietly. She isn't. He walked past her and opened a secure folder on his laptop, archived contingency plans from years ago. Plans she had insisted on drafting, just in case. At the time, he admired her thoroughness. Now he saw the elegance. Every captain had a replacement mapped. Every supply chain had an alternate route. Every account had a secondary trustee. All roads led back to her fingerprints. His phone buzzed again. Security alert. One of his longtime enforcers had accessed an encrypted channel, one that hadn't been active in years. He pulled the logs. The timestamp aligned perfectly with her earlier bank visit. Coincidence was rare in his world. Loyalty was rarer. He summoned the enforcer immediately. When the man entered the office, he looked composed, respectful. But something had shifted in his posture, not defiance. Independence. "You met with her," the boss said. It wasn't a question. The enforcer held his gaze, something he would never have done before. "She requested a conversation. And you accepted?" The pause. "She built this organization too." There was not rebellion, recognition. The boss felt something colder than anger creep into his chest. Authority depends on belief. And belief was redistributing itself. He dismissed the enforcer without punishment. That, more than anything, unsettled the building. The mistress watched the security feeds from the living room, her confidence unraveling. "You're letting this happen," she whispered when he returned. "No," he said quietly. "I'm observing." Because now he understood something critical. This wasn't sabotage. It was succession without announcement. The empire wasn't collapsing. It was breathing differently, adjusting to a new rhythm. That night, another shipment was halted, not seized, not stolen. As if awaiting new instruction. Then came the final notification of the day. An encrypted message sent not to him, but to every captain in the network. Simple. Direct. Stability requires clarity. Loyalty will be rewarded accordingly. No threats. No insults. Just certainty. He stared at the sender ID. Her private authorization seal. The same one he approved years ago. The mistress's voice trembled behind him. "You have to stop her." He didn't respond. Because for the first time in decades, he wasn't sure he could. His empire wasn't under attack. It was being reorganized. And the most terrifying part? No one seemed afraid. They seemed prepared. As the city lights flickered on once more, he realized something irreversible had begun. Not a war. A transition. And somewhere across town, the woman he dismissed with one message was no longer reacting. She was leading. The question wasn't whether he could regain control. The question was whether control had ever truly been his alone. In the underworld, money moves fast. But loyalty moves everything. And tonight, loyalty had a price. The boss stood alone in his private office, lights dimmed, the city humming beneath him like a restless machine. On the large screen in front of him were names: captains, enforcers, financiers, men who had sworn allegiance to him for decades. He studied them the way a general studies a battlefield. Not looking for enemies. Looking for hesitation. Because hesitation is where betrayal is born. The past 48 hours had stripped away something invisible. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms. Reports were shorter. Replies were delayed by seconds too long. No one had openly defied him. But belief was shifting. And belief was the true currency of power. His phone buzzed. Another encrypted message. Not from her. From an anonymous server. He opened it. A spreadsheet appeared, detailed asset allocations, offshore structures, emergency contingency funds. His contingency funds. But the layout had changed. Funds were being redistributed into segmented trusts, not stolen, not drained, repositioned. Strategically. At the bottom of the document was a single sentence. Stability requires diversified loyalty. He felt it then. This wasn't revenge. It was economics. Across town, his wife sat in a dimly lit study surrounded by quiet efficiency. No panic. No raised voices. Just deliberate movement. She wasn't bribing his men. She was offering them certainty. Private calls had been made. Not emotional pleas. Professional conversations. You know how fragile centralized control becomes, she would say calmly. You've seen empires fall because one man believed he was irreplaceable. And then she would offer something more valuable than fear. Structure. Backup leadership. Clear succession. Protection from legal fallout if things went wrong. Loyalty wasn't being stolen from him. It was being invested elsewhere. Back at headquarters, he summoned his inner circle. 5 men entered. 5 men who once would have died for him without blinking. He looked at each of them slowly. Someone is reorganizing my empire, he said evenly. No one reacted. That requires access, he continued. Access comes from trust. Still nothing. Then one of the older captains spoke, carefully. With respect, she built half of what we operate on. The words weren't defiant. They were factual. And facts are harder to crush than rebellion. His jaw tightened. Are you questioning my authority? No, the captain replied calmly. We're questioning the structure. Silence. There was. The fracture. Not betrayal. Recalculation. He dismissed them without punishment again, a move that sent ripples through the building. Because a king who doesn't punish uncertainty either has supreme confidence or diminishing leverage. The mistress watched the security feeds from the penthouse, anxiety etched across her face. This is because you hesitated, she said when he returned. You should have removed her immediately. He poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. You don't understand, he said quietly. No, you don't understand, she snapped. They're choosing her. He looked at her then, really looked. She saw loyalty as possession. His wife saw it as infrastructure. Another alert interrupted them. Major shipment seized. Not by rivals. By federal authorities. Precise timing. Precise location. Only 3 people had access to that routing information. The logistics chief. And her. He immediately called the logistics chief. No answer. Then a message came through. From the chief himself. I've secured alternative channels. Instructions came through the secondary authorization. Secondary authorization. Her system. The boss felt something colder than rage settle in his chest. She wasn't burning the empire down. She was proving she could run it without him. His phone buzzed again. A direct message this time. From her. No encryption theatrics. No anonymous servers. Just her name. He stared at it before opening. Inside was a simple document. A list of captains. Next to each name was a notation. Secured. Undecided. Pending. It was a loyalty ledger. And she was tracking it like an accountant tracks revenue. At the bottom, one final line. You taught me that fear builds obedience. But security builds allegiance. His breathing slowed. He remembered the early days, when they had nothing but ambition and a small circle of believers. She had always argued that systems outlast men. He had laughed at the time. Now he wasn't laughing. Another knock at his office door. The enforcer from before stepped inside again. This time, he didn't wait to be asked. She wants stability, the enforcer said plainly. No bloodshed. No chaos. And what do you want? The boss asked quietly. The enforcer held his gaze. I want to survive what's coming. There was. Loyalty wasn't disappearing. It was hedging. The boss leaned back slowly in his chair. For decades, he believed loyalty was bought with fear, wealth, and dominance. But now the market had changed. And someone else understood the exchange rate better than he did. His screen lit up once more. An internal poll circulating among mid-level operators. Anonymous. One question. Who ensures the future of the organization? 2 options. His name. Hers. The votes were climbing. He didn't check the percentages. He didn't need to. Because for the first time in his reign, loyalty was no longer automatic. It was negotiable. And someone was outbidding him. The city lights flickered beyond the glass walls as night settled deeper. Inside the empire he built, belief was being traded like stock. And the most dangerous realization of all? She wasn't asking them to betray him. She was giving them permission to choose. And in the underworld, choice is the beginning of a revolution. A throne is only powerful if people believe someone is sitting on it. Tonight, the chair at the head of the table felt heavier than ever. The boss entered the underground council chamber beneath his headquarters, a room carved in concrete and shadow, built for war councils and blood-bound decisions. For 20 years, this room had sealed alliances, declared vendettas, and sentenced men to disappear. Every man inside used to stand when he entered. Tonight, they stood. But slower. Respect was still there. Conviction was not. He took his seat at the head of the long black table. The symbolic throne. The center of gravity. No one spoke first. That alone told him everything. "Say it," he said calmly. One of the younger captains cleared his throat. "Operations are stable." Stable. Not strong. Not expanding. Stable. Another added, "Law enforcement pressure has shifted. Raids are precise, almost surgical." And, the boss asked, "And, it feels contained." Contained. Like someone had drawn invisible borders around chaos. He already knew who. Across the city, in a secured high-rise office that didn't bear her name publicly, his wife stood before a window overlooking the financial district. Screens behind her displayed movement, funds stabilizing, shipments rerouted, political contacts reassured. She wasn't destroying his empire. She was removing volatility. Back in the council chamber, the boss leaned forward. "Are any of you questioning my leadership?" No one answered. But silence can scream. Finally, the oldest man in the room, a captain who had once carried bodies for him, spoke. "We're questioning exposure." The word landed heavier than accusation. Exposure meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant collapse. "She's offering insulation," the captain continued carefully. "Distributed control. Legal buffers. Reduced visibility." The boss's eyes hardened. "And what am I offering?" No one responded. Because fear doesn't protect against indictments. Fear doesn't freeze assets. Fear doesn't reassure nervous investors laundering millions through fragile systems. Structure does. He dismissed the council with outrage. That frightened them more. When he returned to the penthouse, the mistress was waiting, pacing again, agitation radiating off her like static. "They're slipping away from you," she said. "They're recalculating risk," he replied. "You sound like her." That comment lingered in the air. He walked past her and poured a drink, but again didn't touch it. The screen in the living room lit up, news alert. A targeted arrest. One of his peripheral associates. The charge? Financial conspiracy. Contained. Specific. Almost as if someone had quietly redirected the storm. His phone buzzed. A secure line. He answered. It wasn't her. It was a government intermediary, someone who only reached out when the temperature of the city changed. "There's an understanding being negotiated," the voice said calmly. "By who?" the boss asked, though he already knew. "By someone who believes decentralization prevents escalation." He ended the call slowly. She wasn't fighting him in the streets. She was reshaping the battlefield into something he couldn't dominate. Later that night, unable to ignore it any longer, he requested a meeting. Neutral ground. Public location. No weapons. The response came back within minutes. Agreed. Conditions apply. When he arrived at the upscale hotel lounge, she was already seated. Composed. Impeccably dressed. Untouchable. For a moment, it felt like 20 years ago, when they were partners, not adversaries. He sat across from her. "You've made your point?" he said quietly. She tilted her head slightly. "Have I?" "You're destabilizing everything." "No," she replied calmly. "I'm stabilizing what you've personalized." He studied her face for anger. There was none. Only resolve. "You're turning them against me." "I'm giving them continuity," she said. "You built loyalty around yourself. I built it around the system." The words cut deeper than accusation. "You think they'll choose you? I think they'll choose survival." A long silence stretched between them. People moved around them in the lounge, unaware that the city's underworld balance was shifting at a quiet table near the window. "You could have spoken to me," he said finally. "I did," she replied softly. "You sent a message instead." The memory hit him like a blade. One impulsive text. One sentence of arrogance. And now the architecture of power was realigning. Is this revenge? He asked. She almost smiled. If it were revenge, you'd already be ruined. The truth in that statement chilled him. This is succession planning, she continued. You taught me to anticipate collapse. I'm preventing one. And where do I fit into this new structure? She held his gaze. That depends on whether you adapt. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. Multiple notifications. Simultaneous. He glanced down. 3 major captains had formally shifted financial oversight into the secondary trust. He looked back up at her slowly. You planned this meeting, he realized. No, she said calmly. I planned for this moment years ago. He felt it then, not defeat. Displacement. A king without a throne isn't overthrown by force. He's outgrown by the system he underestimated. As he stood to leave, she delivered one final line. The empire doesn't belong to either of us. It belongs to whoever can protect it. He walked out of the lounge into the cold night air, city lights blurring slightly. His phone vibrated again. Internal vote results updating. Support shifting. Steadily. Not a coup. Not chaos. Just evolution. For the first time in his reign, he understood something terrifying. The throne was still there, but it no longer needed him to exist. And somewhere behind him, in a high-rise office overlooking the financial district, the woman he dismissed with one message wasn't celebrating. She was consolidating. The question now wasn't whether he would fight. The question was whether there was anything left to fight for. Empires don't fall in explosions. They fall in realizations. The boss stood alone in the penthouse that once felt untouchable. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass. Towers, traffic, ambition. For 2 decades, that skyline had been a mirror of his dominance. Tonight, it looked indifferent. His phone lay on the marble counter in front of him. On the screen was the original message he sent days ago. Don't contact me again. Everything you have is because of me. He read it slowly. Not as a king, but as a man who had miscalculated. Power had always been simple to him. Command, obedience, expansion. But what he failed to understand was permanence. He built fear. She built continuity. And continuity always outlives fear. The past 72 hours had reshaped everything. Major accounts had stabilized under secondary trustees. Political pressure had softened in unexpected places. Law enforcement attention had narrowed. Precise arrests, minimal exposure. Captains who once waited for his signal were now waiting for clarity from a broader structure. Not rebellion. Reorganization. The mistress had disappeared that morning. No note. No confrontation. Just gone. He wasn't surprised. She thrived in ascension, not recalibration. And this wasn't ascension anymore. This was transition. A secure notification flashed on his phone. Emergency council session, initiated by executive majority. He didn't authorize it. He didn't need to. When he arrived at headquarters, the atmosphere was unlike anything he'd felt before. No panic. No raised voices. Efficiency. The council chamber doors opened. This time, they were already seated. Not as subordinates. As stakeholders. He walked to the head of the table, the throne, and paused. No one told him not to sit. But no one invited him either. He remained standing. The oldest captain spoke first. We've reviewed the restructuring proposal. Proposal. Not coup. Not overthrow. Proposal. And, the boss asked quietly, it preserves operational continuity. Reduces concentrated exposure. Protects assets long-term. And my role, he asked. The pause. You retain strategic influence, the captain said carefully. But executive authority becomes distributed. Distributed. The word echoed like a verdict. In the underworld, authority was once absolute. Now it was conditional. He looked around the table. Men he had mentored. Men he had saved. Men who once believed he was irreplaceable. Now they believed the system was. And systems don't kneel. His phone buzzed again. A message from her. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he studied the room. No hostility. No triumph. Just inevitability. He finally tapped the screen. Her message was simple. This is the last time I intervene directly. Beneath it was a document. A finalized structure of the organization moving forward. Layered oversight. Distributed financial access. Succession contingencies. Legal insulation protocols. It was flawless. Not emotional. Not vindictive. Architectural. He exhaled slowly. For years, he believed leadership meant standing alone at the top. But the higher he climbed, the more fragile the structure became. She hadn't ended his empire. She ended its dependence on him. The council waited. Not for his surrender. For his response. He could fight. He still had loyal enforcers. He still had leverage. He could fracture everything out of pride. But that would prove her right. And destroy the legacy he claimed to protect. He walked slowly to the head of the table. Then, instead of sitting, he placed both hands on the back of the chair. For 20 years, he said calmly, this empire survived because we moved before threats arrived. The room was silent. This is no different. A subtle shift of breath moved across the table. He looked at each of them. You want stability, he continued. You want insulation. You want longevity. The beat. Then we adapt. It wasn't surrender. It was evolution. And in that moment, something unexpected happened. Respect returned. Not the fear-driven obedience of the past, but recognition. The throne wasn't destroyed. It was redefined. The meeting concluded without violence. Without betrayal. Without blood. When he left headquarters, the city felt different again. Not hostile. Not submissive. Balanced. Back in the penthouse, he finally opened the final attachment in her message. One last line beneath the structural blueprint. You built the empire. I ensured it survives you. He stared at it for a long time. Then another notification appeared. Unknown sender. No encryption signature. Just one sentence. Leadership is not possession. It is preparation. He didn't know if it was from her. Or from someone else watching. And that uncertainty unsettled him more than anything before. He walked toward the window, overlooking the city he once ruled alone. The empire hadn't collapsed. It hadn't been stolen. It had matured beyond him. His phone buzzed one final time. Her name again. He didn't open it. Not yet. Because for the first time in his life, he understood something terrifying. Power isn't about who sends the message. It's about who prepares for the reply. And some replies echo forever.